Welcome. My name is Adi Martinez Roman. I am the co-president, co-founder of Right to Democracy. We are a project that is building a movement to confront the colonial framework that affects 3.6 million people in 6 territories of the United States. And I have to say that this is our first activity where we are joined by people from all over the world, literally. And before I present to you the panelists that are going to converse today, I want to give you a little bit of context of what we are talking about. So we are talking about today about something that we have in common across our territories. More than our beautiful beaches and flamboyant trees, we are affected by very strong storms. They call them hurricanes in the Caribbean Sea, and they call them typhoons in the Pacific. And today we want to speak with people from Guam and from Northern Mariana Islands to learn from their experience with Typhoon Mawar. Typhoon Mawar affected the Northern Mariana Islands and the and Guam. Sorry, I'm having technical difficulties. Is the presentation is still the presentation? Can you still see the presentation?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. Okay, good. So on May 24th of 2023, Typhoon Mawar affected Guam and Rota. It was the strongest typhoon to pass through the region in 20 years. And it is the strongest typhoon and the first typhoon storm to hit the United States. But many of us did not know that this was happening in this side of the world. It was a typhoon that battered the island with more than 70 centimeters of rain and wind that in speed of 160 kilometers per hour. The damaging winds and rain caused water and power outages in most of Guam and Rota, and they will be, and our panelists will be explaining a little bit more about it. So I wanted to show you, here we have the Northern Mariana Islands and Guam. As you see, it's very close to the South China Sea, the Philippines, New Guinea. And basically, you have Guam to the south, and you have Northern Mariana Islands to the north, with Rota being very close to Guam. Also, here is an image of the hurricane when it was going through the islands. As you see, it hit directly Guam and Rota. And so this is what we're going to be speaking about today. And as you see, also the strong winds hit both islands. We think it's very important for us to be able to hear from our colleagues in Guam and in Northern Mariana Islands, to hear what are the challenges that they face and they are facing in their recovery efforts, and then have a conversation between the territories about what has been the experience in the different territories. So I'm going to start to introduce our Guam people. I have Charles Teves. Charles Teves is the administrator of the Office of Civil Defense and serves as the State Emergency Management Director for the island of Guam and Territorial Coordinating Officer during presidential disaster declarations. He has a BBA in Finance and Economics and an MPA from the University of Guam. an MA Intelligence Studies from American Military University, a Master's in Military Arts and Sciences from the U.S. Command and General Staff College. He graduated from the Naval Postgraduate School's Executive Leaders Program. He's a certified manager from IACM and is finishing his doctorate in business administration. Charles is also an infantry officer with the Guam Army National Guard and an adjunct professor of 7 years for the University of Guam MPA program. Also from Guam, we have the pleasure of having Jacqueline Tarlaji. Jacqueline obtained her bachelor's in criminal justice from the Chaminade University in Honolulu, Hawaii, a master's in tax law from the University of Alabama School of Law, and moved to obtain a Juris Doctor from the University of Washington. She became a member of the Guam Bar Association in 1999 and has been serving as a president of the Guam Bar since 2017. She's now an attorney, she's a private attorney in her private firm, and I have to say, a devoted mother of 8 that resides in Guam. So I have the pleasure to pass the word to Charles so he can start speaking about what the situation is in Guam.
All right, Hafaday, do you hear me? Okay. First of all, I just want to thank everyone for inviting me to the panel on behalf of the Governor and Lieutenant Governor of Guam. I'm very happy to go and speak on Typhoon Mawar restoration and recovery efforts. So first of all, talking about recovery challenges is very important to differentiate between what is response and what is recovery. When we think of response, we generally think of your days to weeks, and that's the short term, and intermediate, we think of weeks to months. And I can tell you that we are still pretty much in the response, and only now, after over a month of restoration efforts, moving into recovery. And when we think of recovery, you think of your, like I said, months to years, and that's your long-term recovery effort to return things to before pre-storm conditions. So some of the challenges with restoration is first, the governor is only given $250,000 for emergencies. So you can imagine $250,000 to prepare for the emergency and then to respond to the emergency after. So a lot of times, what has to happen is she has to use her transfer authority or seek a special appropriation for the Guam legislature. In this case, we're fortunate because the Guam legislature gave the governor $50 million to utilize for this emergency. A lot of the procurement efforts, emergency procurement, went into state active duty of the Guam National Guard. And I can tell you the price tag for state active duty currently is about $100K a day. For debris management, that's utilization of heavy equipment. A lot of that went to emergency protective measures such as commodities, emergency feeding, wraparound services for shelter operations. And so I can tell you one of the biggest challenges during any disaster is always going to be funding. The second challenge is that this storm happened right before the weekend. And so can you imagine calling a condition back to condition of rating 4 on a Thursday? Vendors are still assessing Thursday. They're still assessing Friday. And then we hit the weekend. So what that meant is we're unable to procure necessary goods and services until really Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. And the need is immediate within 72 hours, right? The first 24 to 72 to 96 hours. And so that was the second challenge. Additionally, vendors, some of them don't accept government POs. So we can't go to Home Depot and buy, generators and chainsaws and much needed equipment because they just don't deal business with the government long. I did make a recommendation for pre-disaster contracting, so that's more of a policy issue with the Office of the Governor that we'll probably be exploring as well. Other challenges is that with specific to this storm is the cascading failure of the trigger bending systems. Everything from fuel to telecommunications to water, and of course power. We really expected that power to have a failure in Guam's power grid. Despite the efforts we've made towards mitigation over decades, I can tell you that Guam is a lot more resilient. We've only had a very minor damage to power poles because the majority of our poles here are concrete. So Compared to previous storms, power restoration went pretty fast. I mean, we restored about 95% of the power within the first 30 days. And, you know, we can only get better with undergrounding of power lines. With the water, what really happened there was the loss of power generation. So backup generators fell with that. Telecommunications, the inability to maintain situational awareness, the inability to communicate for necessary resources made the need to exercise primary, alternate, contingency, and emergency forms of communication. So I can tell you those are all a lot of challenges. Other challenges include the authority the governor has over public utilities, which she does not. She does not have authority over Guam Solid Waste Authority either. However, they all came together. It was pretty much a good collaborative partnership to communicate the needs throughout the government of Guam, both the public and the private sector, and then of course incorporating our nonprofit organizations and non-governmental organizations. And I'll leave my last 10 seconds of my 5 minutes to say that I went to high school with Neil Weir. I'll tell you one quick story is that he, as a high school student, won a 5K race and won a brand new car in high school. He's a 2 years my senior, so thank you.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, Charles. People can start putting their questions in the question and answer box so we don't forget it. And also people that need, las personas que necesiten intérprete pueden presionar el globo a la derecha para que puedan escoger la opción de español para que puedan acceder al intérprete. Y disculpen que no lo dije antes. So now we pass with Jackie Tarlaje.
Alpha Day. Thank you, Addie, so much, and Right to Democracy for putting this panel together. Today, I was asked to talk a little bit about the challenges to the legal community. I think our first challenge was what Addie said, was that this was the first major typhoon that Guam experienced in 20 years. So most people forgot what it's like to have a major disaster hit. And so there were many things that were out of place. Our phone services went down, our internet went down, our power was off, our water was off. I think it took about 4 weeks before we had the majority of people having water and power restored. So as a result, we had a major impact on our legal community. The first problem was we had no disaster plan in place for our Guam Bar Association, right? So that's a challenge that we saw. I mean, most organizations our size, because we're only about 300 active members, most memberships like this don't have a disaster plan in place, but we saw very clearly how it's necessary to have that in place here in Guam. So what we saw with our attorneys is that we had massive interruption of business. You don't have power, you don't have water, it's very difficult to conduct business. Then you go to the internet and you realize that your internet is down, you can't operate without it. So that was our first challenge, is trying to figure out how we were going to put back into operation our businesses. But a major challenge was we didn't know where our attorneys were. We didn't know who was impacted. And so with my two-man show for the Bar Association, we had to put together like a WhatsApp campaign. So we WhatsApped all our members to try to find out who was impacted, what kind of damages did they incur. And what we discovered was that many of them had massive water damage to their computer equipment because, surprise, surprise, this particular storm decided that it wanted to come down into our air conditioning ducts. So many places got damaged as a result because the water poured into our offices and into our homes. So that was a challenge. I mean, a challenge also is communicating with your judiciary, right? So we have been very lucky here in Guam. We have a very open communication line with the judiciary of Guam and with the federal court. So we were very quickly able to discuss with those bodies a plan to suspend all court operations and any active casework that any of our attorneys would have to do. One of the impacts that we discussed with our judiciary is not to forget that our attorneys are also human beings, meaning they've got families. So for myself, for example, right, the major impact of this particular storm was the fact that I have a family to take care of. I have children to take care of. And many of the attorneys in my bar association are also older. They're like 40 plus. It makes up about 65% of my bar association. And we have elderly parents as well. So this family relations presented a major impact following this storm. Because of the loss of power and water to my home, we needed to stay in my office. Can you imagine? My family of 10 in law office operations. So this was an impact that we discussed with the judiciaries and said, we need to suspend. And so thank goodness for our judiciary's response, because what they did was they decided how we best should proceed with our caseload. So the new challenge now is trying to recover, as Charles said, right, is we need to put together a plan because we're still in recovery following COVID. And so our caseload is falling quickly behind. So those are the major challenges that we have on the legal community side. And so because I know that we wanted to stick to a 5-minute rule, I am going to go ahead and stop there, and then we can take questions at the end. Thanks, Addie.
Sure. And of course, we are going to have the opportunity of panels interchanging questions. So that's another opportunity to have exchange. Yes, so from the north of Guam, we have the North Mariana Islands, and we have Miss Sheila Babauta, born and raised on the island of Saipan in the Mariana Islands. Sheila Babauta spent much of her adolescent life at the intersection of intensifying climate change and militarization. While pursuing a future in public service was not a part of her initial plan, her respect and responsibility for her homeland made it a natural field for her to land in. As a passionate leader, Sheila served her second term on the 22nd Northern Mariana Legislature in the House of Representatives, was part of the Natural Resources Committee, and is a chairwoman in the nonprofit Friends of the Marianas Trench. Sheila.
Thank you, Addie. Hafade Tiro from the island of Saipan. My name is Sheila Babauta. I am very happy to be here. Thank you so much to the organizers for the invitation. Super Typhoon Mawar did not impact my island, the island of Saipan, the same way it did our sister islands, Guam and Rota. And so I'm very happy to have representation from our sister island, Rota, today. I'm so excited to hear from Mr. Ivan Mereb. And so this isn't our first super typhoon, not even since I've been home. This is the third super typhoon in not even 10 years. And so the first super typhoon that swept through the island of Saipan was in 2015, Super Typhoon Sodalor. And we learned a lot from that experience because we were not prepared. We were also told that it wasn't going to be as strong as it was. And so after that experience in 2015, we were better prepared for Super Typhoon U2 that hit in 2018. And I was here on the ground, home, back from living abroad for over 10 years. And so during the recovery efforts of Super Typhoon U2, we did have federal agents on the ground already. We had FEMA on the ground. There were many lessons learned from Super Typhoon Sodalor, so we were better prepared. I played a pivotal role with the nonprofit organization, the Marianas Young Professionals, and I assisted with receiving and distributing of major donations from our community in the diaspora. And what we found was that the current models that existed for recovery efforts were not effective. We had many of our community members in long lines waiting to receive donated goods, waiting to receive water, waiting to receive food. And so what we did was alter that model and really engage with our community, going straight into the villages And it was a faster way to reach our community and provide the needs that they deserved. And so I'm very happy to be here. I'm very excited to hear from our sister island of Luta and our sister island of Guam. Thank you so much for sharing. It's unfortunate that we're connecting on an issue like this, but as a community advocate and a climate justice and environmental justice advocate, it's really important for us to see how our lived experiences are connected to the larger issues at hand. And so I would like to yield any of my remaining time to our sister island of Luta. And I'm so excited to hear from Mr. Ivan Mereb. Thank you, Addie.
No, thank you, Sheila. And I have Mr. Ivan Mereb, like Sheila pronounced it, from born and raised in Luta. Ivan Mereb currently serves as a public information officer for the Honorable Mayor of Luta, Aubrey Huckog. He is a trusted member of the Rhoda community and helped lead efforts of recovery and communications after Super Typhoon Mawar as the operations section chief for the Municipal Operation Command Center. Ivan has been a public servant for over a decade and works to ensure his people are informed and connected on issues that impact their homeland. Ivan,
thank you so much, Audie. Thank you, everyone, and the panel. Wishing great and beautiful day to all our brothers and sisters throughout the territories. Thank you guys for joining us. Giving out again, big shout out to our listeners in the CNMI, Rhoda, Saipan, Tinian, and the Northern Islands. Thank you, everyone, for coming in. I just want to share that this is like the first time I'm aware of that all the territories are able to come together and talk about issues, especially issues affecting us as territories. I know for some of us in our constituents in our hometown and our home island, they don't like to hear the word territories. It's not something that they want to hear. But in actuality, I'm glad that we're having this discussion, especially about disasters, typhoons, especially for us in the Marianas. We are known as the Typhoon Alley, from Guam all the way up to the Northern Islands. We receive more typhoons than most areas in the other territories, even in some states. The truth of the fact is, everyone from the islands are either have one horrible experience of a typhoon, and that stuck with them for a while. And that is their resiliency of continuing to strive and do better. I think that this Typhoon Mawar, I understand the media labeled it as a typhoon that was going to hit Rhoda and Guam. In actuality, I'll be honest with you, Rhoda was spared the brunt. Guam, our sister island, was given the worst shape of the typhoon. I guess for us as the recipient of the small brunt of the typhoon, the only challenges that we have here, I guess, is addressing issues that are very key. Number one would be, as territories, could we avail for help from other territories? Could we avail from help from ships that are not U.S. branded as off our shores? These are the key assets that we need to raise and ask. Because to me, if I had to bring up an issue, one of the issues to this day will always be the Jones Act. That's one of the things that I have no understanding that it's still implemented. And I have to be honest, whether we're from the Marianas, we're from Guam, or whether we're from the territories of American Samoa, the Virgin Islands, or Puerto Rico, we're all American citizens. We are all American citizens. That's the bottom line. So as good behavior, as good neighborly conduct, we take care of our own. Like many islanders, especially those of my generation that sees the island not just as a place or a destination, but the island is it. Everyone must help everyone on the island. That's how we succeed. I just want to yield the balance of my time so we can start the questions, but I do want to say thank you for making me part of this historic moment. And Audie, thank you for your work that you do at Puerto Rico and giving the voice out to the people. Thank you. Jesus Masi, God bless.
Thank you so much, Ivan. So I'm going to go now to the islands in the Caribbean. We're going to switch. And I am going to introduce Professor Cecilio Ortiz. born and raised in Puerto Rico. Dr. Cecilia Ortiz holds a PhD in Public Policy and Administration and is currently a professor and chair of Department of Public Affairs and Security Studies in the University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley. Among his many distinguished achievements, he co-founded the University of Puerto Rico's National Institute of Energy and Island Sustainability, INESI, and the RISE Network, an inter-university collaborative convergence network determined to improve and coordinate university interventions in pre- and post-disaster environments. Cecilio, I yield.
Is my mic on? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hafadai to all our friends, and thank you, Ali, for this opportunity. The conversation seems to be coming to a crescendo, so I'm just going to say a couple of things and then yield the rest of my time for the discussion that promises to be really rich. You know, for the last 6 years after Hurricane Maria, we have learned from a particular positionality that we were able to gain insight from, and that's the position of being academics in a university that was impacted by a disaster event itself. A lot of times you think as universities, not as first responders and as like these hubs of knowledge that they're supposed to be there for communities. But what happens when you're a community yourself that is impacted by an event, if you have not developed the connections, the interconnections, the engagement, the humble relationships and architecture of relationships that ties you to the community, when the event comes, the university might be, you know, not only insufficient, but irrelevant at those times. So what I want to share with the group, first of all, is solidarity and empathy with what our colleagues have just went through. It wasn't easy when hurricanes Irma and Maria ravaged through Puerto Rico, and we have gained so much from the solidarity that others from Guam, like President Tom Price at the University of Guam, like Dr. Shelton at the Center for Island Sustainability, and others in the Caribbean, like Greg Guanel, that I am happy to see somewhere out there, and nice to see you, Greg. But I want to call our attention that knowledge and universities, just as critical infrastructure in the physical sense, is critical infrastructure for us. And it needs to be organized and structured in collaborative and partnership with communities before events happen. So I want to put as a topic in the conversation how moving forward we can make sure that as territories, whether you're a territory in the Pacific or a territory in the Caribbean, or like myself now, I'm also a neighbor to unincorporated territories that we call colonias in the US-Mexico border. And some of the same conditions of vulnerability, we can find them inside the mainland US in some of the regions of Texas. So the issues of community resilience and the role of universities in addressing those vulnerabilities and enhancing the resilience of communities, we must join together to discuss, and I'll just leave it at that. And I make myself available as a resource, as a shoulder to cry, as a friend, and as a fellow islander to all of the members of this dialogue. And again, hafa dai to all.
Thank you, Cecilia. So now I have the pleasure to introduce a friend and colleague, Amaris Torres Rivera, also born and raised in Puerto Rico. She's a community lawyer since she was in law school. And since 2017, I had the pleasure to know her because she served as coordinator of the Emergency Legal Aid Fund and then became the executive director of the Puerto Rico Access to Justice Fund Foundation, where she still serves. She obtained a bachelor's degree in sociology and Juris Doctor from the University of Puerto Rico, Rio Piedras. She holds a certification in economic, social, and cultural rights from the Global Justice and Human Rights Program at the University of Los Andes in Bogota, Colombia. And she founded and currently mentors the Pro Bono Democracy and Citizen Participation Program at the Pro Bono Law School at the University of Puerto Rico. Amaris.
Thank you, Ali. It is a privilege to be in this panel with all of you. I'm very honored. And as the previous panelist, Cecilia said, I express my solidarity and my empathy to all of you who passed through this typhoon. And I was asked to today to talk about a little bit of what we're doing here in Puerto Rico from specifically the area that I've been working on, which is legal aid. And I'm going to try to be very brief with some of the challenges that we've encountered in Puerto Rico, because I know that we have a discussion further on, and I'm going to share a very brief presentation. Okay. So one of the issues in Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria in September of 2017, after also another Hurricane Irma, was that we had a very delayed FEMA intervention. And then also further on in the recovery process as well, we had several challenges. And one of the most notorious legal challenges that we had was with ownership. Rights to land, rights to the ownership of the house that was damaged by the hurricane. So just a very brief context of, my foundation, currently the foundation I direct, it's a nonprofit organization in Puerto Rico that promotes access to legal services for low-income families. Right now, we are handling 30 legal aid projects, mainly impacting women and elderly. And we provide different legal aid services, mortgage foreclosure, gender violence, community development, and this one, the last one, the area that I'm going to talk about a little more. So to give you a little bit of context, Puerto Rico, also we're in the in the highway of hurricanes as well, as I believe Ivan mentioned, also from the Pacific. And we have to, we have to deal with this constantly, but definitely Maria, Category 5 hurricane, was definitely catastrophic for Puerto Rico. And we had similar issues like the power outage for months, without water for months. And we lost approximately around 4,000 lives, which was too much. And definitely, with a little bit more than 3 million people living in Puerto Rico, it was definitely very challenging. So when we had to deal with the delayed response, and then we had to deal with all the process to request help from FEMA, we started confronting several challenges. One was the language access challenge. As most of you know, Puerto Rico, the principal and main language, which everyone speaks here, is Spanish. And then we had that issue with, personnel from FEMA being deployed who only spoke English. And then in the centers and the DRCs, the disaster recovery centers, only people who spoke English. Letters from the applications only in English, so there was an issue about that. And then there were other challenges, because we had a lot of elders. And in Puerto Rico, there's approximately about between 44% of poverty in Puerto Rico. And we had to do a lot with elders that didn't know how to necessarily read and write. We didn't have also internet access at that moment. So there were several challenges. One of the main challenges when requesting FEMA for individual assistance program especially for damages to the roof or to the housing was that FEMA denied 85,000 families this aid, this individual assistance, because they had difficulty demonstrating with the documents that they were owners of that house, which was sad to see because the guidelines provided exceptions. But as lawyers, we started investigating a little bit more, and we definitely understood. And then on past September was published a report that evidenced discriminatory practices against Puerto Rico in this after Maria, that they did not apply Puerto Rican law when they were evaluating the ownership of the land, which our civil code allows people to be owners of the land without necessarily having a property title, which was one of the requirements FEMA was requesting from everyone here. So we saw that issue, and what did we do? So with 60% of the families being ineligible and 85,000 households being denied because of ownership, our foundation decided to invest in advocacy efforts. Sorry, there's a typo, I just realized, and direct legal services. So what we did was we organized trainings for lawyers, trainings basically on emergency legal aid, the FEMA federal assistance, individual assistance, how to manage applications and appeals. And then we structured a plan to impact the 78 municipalities in Puerto Rico, going to the most vulnerable communities, going to the FEMA centers and helping people with their appeals because of especially this lack of ownership issue. And then we thought that, you know, with all this advocacy efforts and all this direct help, everything was going to be better. But we had a Category 1 hurricane this past September, 2022, Fiona, and we had unprecedented flooding. And sadly, we saw that, you know, FEMA presented the same challenges to the people of Puerto Rico. Also, a very slow recovery, 6 months after only 12% of inspections. 26 people have been denied because of lack of ownership again, the language barriers again, and affecting also deaf community here in Puerto Rico. So we continue to work on these challenges from our foundation. We continue with our advocacy efforts and with the direct legal services. And of course, we are here to collaborate with any ideas with not only the bar, but with government or any other communities in the other territories that were impacted by Typhoon Mawar. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amaris. I'm so proud of the work that Fundación is doing. I directed it when Hurricane Maria passed and seen all the advancement of the work that has been done afterwards. It's amazing. Thank you, Amaris, for keeping such good work. I wanted to introduce our friend from American Samoa, but I don't see him connected. Ethan, are you there? He's connected. I just don't see him in the camera. So let's then move to Gregory, to friends in the Virgin Islands, right by Puerto Rico. Professor Gregory Guanell, born and raised in the Virgin Islands, is a coastal, ocean, and civil engineer with expertise in climate adaptation strategies and green infrastructure. He has worked with the Nature Conservancy and Stanford University's Natural Capital Project, developing decision support tools for coastal risk assessment and promoting sustainable community development. Professor Guanell holds a PhD in civil engineering from Oregon State University and has experience in designing structures to mitigate environmental hazards. Professor.
Yes, good morning, good evening to everyone. I'm happy to be here. So just want to say that the testimony from our friends from Guam and Mariana Island really resonated brought some flashbacks for me. But I want to say that the thought that keeps coming back, unfortunately for me, is some of the work that we're doing. I'm going to share some slides real quick. This slide. Just to kind of help anchor the conversation a little bit. And the first thing is that, this is a picture from Hurricane Maria. We had Maria and Irma impacting the territories, and there was a lot of money. There is a lot of money that came from the federal government, $10 billion. So on the one hand, we are blessed with, a federal government that sort of, provides a lot of funding for the recovery and the rebuilding of the territory. However, I think that these gifts from the government, from the federal government, I think that there's some questions that I think we are sort of starting to see in terms of really the effectiveness of this spending, because ultimately what we find is that there are some long-term issues that the territory has that I don't think this funding will address, and I don't think that the federal policies are meant to address some of those long-standing issues. Those are pictures taken, last year of, the territory infrastructure, and despite, those billions of dollars, we really have some extremely vulnerable regions with degraded infrastructure that suffer from lack of maintenance and still sort of impact on the hurricane. And talking to some friends of mine who are working, round the clock with the agencies, it's probably unlikely that some of those regions will see any relief because of the way that the federal government computes the aid and the way that it allocates the aid, but also just the difficulty of navigating all the paperwork. We also feel that there are some structural systemic issues in a territory that go beyond just sort of this sort of one-stop approach that the federal government has post-hurricane or post-disaster. This is a map of a social vulnerability analysis that we did in the territory, and region in red are the most vulnerable region. And what we found is that we have a concentration of poverty, social vulnerability, flooding, roads that are under lower quality roads, but also air, noise, pollutions that sort of degrade the environment on a regular basis and increase the stress of those communities on a regular basis. It's really sort of a concentration of various sort of stressors, acute and chronic, on those communities. And those type of discussion are rarely discussed during this sort of recovery effort, where we sort of focus mostly on the great big utilities for good reason. But I think that there needs to be a dialogue that needs to happen more at the community level in those dialogue, and less, in addition to having those dialogue at the government. This is the result of some analysis that we also have done, looking at who owns solar panels. Solar panels and batteries have become the sort of, sign for resilience from an energy side, because, 8 years after a hurricane, we still suffer from chronic issues with our power utilities. I also saw in the paper today that part of, St. Croix, which is part of the Virgin Island, has been suffering from lack of water for many days until Friday, until tomorrow, because of those sort of chronic issues. But what we find is that those who have access, in this case of solar power, to sort of help them navigate some of those chronic disruption, tend to be white, tend to be wealthier, and often tend to be, not sort of local. And that also goes, both graphs in terms of the racial social dynamic, but also another way of looking at it is, home values and of who owns solar panels, who owns batteries in the territory. And so basically some of the work that we're trying to do now is continue to work with the government in terms of really thinking about, big picture infrastructure, but start bringing some of those inequities up, and some of those inequities, not only locally, but also with the federal program that tend to, sometimes, despite the good effort, especially of the present administration, the programs are not just adapted and geared towards the territory life. And so sort of like key insights that we have done from some of our work is that we need to continue to manage risk. We need to continue to sort of think systemically about some of those issues. But the most important thing that we find is really sort of improving the governance. It really is thinking differently about how we think about system delivery, not relying so much on the government to really sort of provide those services and start to really think about with communities and community leaders and what does it mean for them to have what they need in time of crisis and developing those solutions, and creates all the procedures for that to happen, and have a constant discussion with the federal government to basically tell them that their thinking about governance is not what is happening in a territory. We have a different way of governing ourselves, of dealing with our system, but also that there needs to have a more sort of deeper dialogue about really what it means to be resilient in this age where chronic and acute disruption are happening all the time. And unfortunately, those who have access to solution are not the most vulnerable. So I will stop here because of time, and I'm looking forward to more discussion.
Yes, thank you so much, Professor Guanel. As you see, we have a very big variety of experts here with us from all the territories. I would like to make sure that we don't have Ethan Lake with us. Ethan, if you're here, please just put your camera on so we can hear from American Samoa. If not, we're just going to move into a small exchange between the participants that we wanted to give them opportunity to ask questions and have an exchange between each other with suggestions of the things that you have heard throughout this conversation. And afterwards, we'll go and answer all the questions, and we have a lot of questions in the questions and answer box. So I'll defer to the panelists to what they want to do in this section to be able to exchange between each other. And I wanted also, Cecilia, if you could talk a little bit more about the governance in disaster recovery, and how do you see, you have studied directly the governance of disaster recovery in the Caribbean. How do you perceive from the Pacific if we have the same issues of and challenges of governance of disaster recovery? That can be a starter of this exchange and conversation.
Sure, and again, I guess the quick question, the quick answer to your teaser question is that there is no homogeneity. There is no one size fits all governance answers to all these different terrains. And unfortunately, some of our federal agencies do operate from the standpoint that only one recipe will work in all of these different terrains. So I wholeheartedly agree with a lot of what Dr. Guanel was bringing up in his presentation. But the fact is that the governance, and let me define governance so that we all are in the same page, because some folks think that governance is government, and to the contrary, government is part of a governance system, but not necessarily the governance system. And in the case of a disaster response, recovery, and the disaster cycle, governmental agencies have been pointed out as having deficiencies in the way they involve themselves in these extreme operating environments. The General Accounting Office and other reports have been pretty direct in telling FEMA some of the shortfalls in their approach. But let me call attention to something in the Puerto Rico experience that might be of use to our colleagues in the Pacific. The fall of our electric system really has captured the attention of most of the conversation of post-Maria recovery and reconstruction, even though and please, this is not something that I want to happen, but we need to really, really be careful in a climate change world not to pay too much attention to what just happened, because right when you do that, cascading events from vector-borne diseases coming from the structural damage from these events and other events that might follow that were not in the radar, like us. We had earthquakes after Hurricane Irma and Maria, and immediately that we had to deal with COVID, and after that, other events, including drought and including floods, and also Fiona just lately. So we need to, if we're going to look systemically at this, we need to stop thinking on event-based, looking at stuff, and start gaining a more systemic view of the governance of these events needs to be able to tie the uncertainty that all of these cascading possibilities can bring. Our governments are not really geared for that. Our governments are geared for every 4 years, getting a party elected, getting folks in and out of the government bureaucracy based on that party affiliation, and that clashes against our survivability. So I know that it's easier, and it's been historically more important to count on issues related to physical infrastructure resilience. How do we harden our systems to become more resilient against this? Well, it just so happens we need to take care of the soft aspects of disaster resilience. We need to make sure that our governance systems, like the experience we're having in Puerto Rico, are actually reflective of the diversity of those experiences, life experiences. We need the communities, in many ways, have been the ones that have been at the forefront of understanding the needs of their own and acting upon themselves to become active participants in the governance of their resilience. So just to end with a little story, I keep going back to the importance of the community university nexus in our islands. I mean, parents entrust their kids to us in our classrooms. We become part of their households a lot of times. We come from the same neighborhoods a lot of times. But the industry of the university many times is trying to follow other models, the Harvard model or the MIT model, and wants to be a global endeavor. And sometimes we give our backs to our communities where we actually should be doing the opposite. So in Puerto Rico, at the time of Hurricane Maria, university professors had gotten together and had identified resources inside the University of Puerto Rico that could be of service before events like this came. And that's how the National Institute for Energy and Island Sustainability was born. And even the Department of Energy, after Hurricane Maria, told the Puerto Rican government that the INESI, the National Institute for Energy and Island Sustainability, was a key component of the reconstruction. after the hurricane, the University of Puerto Rico killed the institute despite that recommendation. So when we speak about this disconnect between local government, community resilience, and governance and decision making, there are actual examples of how killing local knowledge ability to insert themselves in the governance of these events actually elongates times of recovery and reconstruction. And that is the least I want to see in the Pacific. So we need to collaborate, we need to share experiences, we need to talk a lot, we need a lot more Adi Martinez's opening spaces like this to be able to share these experiences in environments that actually bring about action. So in essence, to finish that story, if the Institute hadn't been killed, and if the suggestion of even the Department of Energy would have been followed by local governments, now we are 6 years after the Maria event. And now is when officials, both federal and state, are doing tours in communities to hear from them what they think 6 years after. I really want you to understand what I'm saying. This, you can touch this. This is not theory. This is life. If you do not use your local knowledge appropriately, if it's not part of the governance of recovery and reconstruction, it's ensuring an elongated timeline for recovery and reconstruction. And unfortunately, what happens with that is that people die.
Definitely.
Definitely,
especially when electricity, right, is one of the main sources for health, to be able to sustain your health treatments in Puerto Rico. And I wanted you guys to have some reaction to what Dr. Cecilio Ortiz had, or if you have questions for another panelist between you. There's also many questions in the question and answer box, and I can start going through them so you can react to those. So we agree to go through the question and answers box? Okay, good. So we have a question from Cora Christian about the discussion in the mainland US about limiting assistance to places for that like Florida, because people live in areas in the coast where the hurricanes will be more likely to cause damage. What are the implications and that we may be punished or not supported if you build or live in high-risk areas? What are your thoughts on this issue? You guys have an answer to that? Yes, Jackie.
Well, Addie, I was going to say the restrictions are already in place. For example, here in Guam, FEMA, basically, if you've received FEMA in the past, right, there are restrictions on rebuild. So you cannot build a structure that is not typhoon proof. So essentially what that means on Guam is that you need to build a concrete structure, right? So a concrete structure on Guam is enormously expensive. So for example, right now, a maximum amount on a completely destroyed home would be about $40,000. To build today, it would cost you $400,000 to build a family home. Guam's housing market is extremely crazy. Our children, my children who are young adults, will never be able to afford a home here unless their family assists them. So following a storm like this, where a home is completely destroyed, like I said, there's already a restriction. So I can imagine that there will be more restrictions placed on areas like this, as opposed to no more funding, right? I think that that's a much better choice. But also I do in fact support some type of construction in concrete senses, because this is how Guam has been able to survive like a major storm like this. The amount of damage that is reduced by having a concrete structure is immense. When I think back to seeing pictures from the typhoons from the 1970s, right? I mean, it was mass destruction because most homes were built out of wood and tin. Whereas today, you know, it's like the three pigs in the Three Pigs story, right? You know, you make a house out of wood and you make a house out of concrete, the wind comes. With a concrete structure, the likelihood of survival is better. So rather than place a complete ban on coastal area as high risk and withdrawing support, I think what really needs to be considered is the increase of support that's needed, because a $40,000 amount is nothing. There's just no way anyone's going to be able to build a home with $40,000. And what you end up with is now you're ending up with having to rebuild substandard. And now you possibly could be disqualifying yourself from future FEMA assistance because of the fact that you didn't build according to their requirements.
Thank you. Any reactions or comments about that same subject?
I think
Yes, Amaris.
I just, I agree, but I wanted to add something that I've noticed in Puerto Rico, and is that, especially with FEMA assistance and flooding insurance specifically, I've seen that for some reason, there are communities, specifically poor communities, that are in flooding areas, but then we have high income communities that also are in flooding areas, but you know, government intervention and FEMA assistance tend to be different, right? And I like the word that the person used, punish, because I definitely see an inequity and poor communities being punished with, you know, the intervention of assistance and government, with, you know, high income communities that are living basically in the same flooding area. So as attorneys here, we are also, you know, aware of this, and we also have to be, you know, accessible with our legal orientation and legal aid, because the, you know, the help should be for everyone, right? And not promote gentrification and not promote, you know, to displace thousands of people from communities, and then high income families and high income communities just leave them in the flooding zone. So that's something I wanted to add.
Thank you, Maris. I think somebody else wanted to react to that too. And I have to excuse Cecilio Ortiz because his electricity went out. And that happens pretty frequent in Puerto Rico since Hurricane Maria hit. We have not been able to recover yet. And was somebody else going to react to that? Or
yeah, I just wanted to react real quick to say that I mean, I think that there is a dialogue that must be had about a different way of approaching development, because to some extent, yes, it's going to be more and more costly to build to resist the impact of those natural hazards if you live in a hazardous area. It's just going to be more and more costly. But I think, I don't know how to say it because I don't have an answer yet, but I think that we do not take the time to then think about a different model of financing and a different model of what does it mean to have a home. We keep wanting to have the same thing and basically saying, well, it's just going to be more expensive. So you're just going to have to figure out if you can afford it or if you cannot. And then that's it. We don't change any of the basic rules or basic approach of living. There are, and I think that sort of creates a conflict for some where they have a slightly different concept, a different relationship with their home, where a home is part of your family. A home is not just an engineering structure. A home has a meaning that is beyond just walls and concrete and nails. And like I said, I don't have an answer for it, but what strikes me in all those discussions, not what the panelists have said, but what comes from the general sort of insurance and federal and FEMA is we never question the fundamentals, I would say. And I would welcome, and I've seen others trying to provide different models, but the noise coming from the federal and the insurance and the is very, very loud, and so it doesn't create a lot of room for alternate type of dialogue that sort of question a little bit, okay, so what does that mean beyond just it's more expensive? I don't know if that makes sense, but that's what I would say is missing in this dialogue, and that's my reaction to this question of, being punished or anything like that. It's like, we live where we live for more than just a view. There are other things than this traditional real estate value sort of thing that Miami Beach has. It's a different relationship.
Thank you so much. We have a lot of questions in line. I wanted to throw 3 of them to you and have you react. We have, what does the right to democracy mean in the context of natural weather event response and disaster mitigation reparation efforts? I think Cecilio has already talked about that a bit, but if others want to react. We also have, what lessons have you learned? I would love to know how the lessons you have learned have affected the way that people, academic or not, think about hierarchical relationships. I guess that is also related to the last question. And there's a question about how many universities teach disaster management and resiliency. Do we know? And the other one that I wanted to make here, this one, Javier Balmaceda, from living in Washington, D.C., from Puerto Rico. Thank you, Javier, for your question. I was hoping to learn more about the federal government response to the damages wrought by Typhoon Mawar. What are your thoughts on FEMA's response? Has Congress legislated any disaster recovery mitigation funds? So let me leave it at that for those questions. Who wants to go first? Can somebody in the Pacific, Sheila, Jackie, Charles, or Ivan, tell their opinion about FEMA's response? And we have Ethan from American Samoa. Good. Actually, Ethan is a good person to talk about FEMA's response because Ethan has worked as a Fusion Center Administrator for the American Samoa Department of Homeland Security. So, and he also is a co-founder and co-president of the Pacific Island Foundation, a nonprofit based in American Samoa. Ethan, can you speak to us about the experience in American Samoa with FEMA and the challenges that you have faced, and then the other territories in the Pacific can tackle that question? You are on mute. Oh, I cannot hear you. Can you hear him? For some reason, we cannot hear you, Ethan. That's so bad.
No?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so thank you again, Addie, and I apologize. I finished an important meeting with the governor. Yeah, for FEMA, the response for American Samoa it actually has been, I think, pretty good. Usually when there's a cyclone, so down in American Samoa, we say cyclone. I know you guys have hurricane and they have typhoon up north, so we call it a cyclone, and not sure why, but the response that I've experienced has been pretty good in general. When they're aware of it, they try to send some folks out. The problem is we only, with 2 flights a week, that can be a challenge as well too. And the other challenge though is when FEMA does come out, the problem that we have, and I think some of the other territories are similar, we don't have any addresses. We don't have any street names and stuff too. So that makes it a challenge when you're trying to file paperwork and so forth. And that we're trying to address that because in trying to figure out ways to get funding. I think Virgin Islands went through a whole program to get their streets addressed. We still don't have that, so that becomes a bit of a challenge for the folks coming from FEMA. The other thing is in American Samoa we have our houses are different. We have fales, that's what they call a house. So they're not your traditional U.S. mainland type houses. You have folks that really in some ways live in a shack. And so it's trying to explain that to FEMA and the folks that are coming out that this is where they live. And our kitchens, we use what's called the umu. And that's the kitchen itself. It's basically like a shed, or not even a shed, just it could be something like a tin roof with some poles, and they cook on the ground. And so it's not your traditional stove, right? We're using our own stove that we're used to, which is basically putting rocks on the ground, sort of like the Hawaiian luau, which they do for tourists. We actually do that as part of our regular cooking several times a week.
Thank you, Ethan. Just my sympathy right now to Cecilia Ortiz, which is on the south side of Puerto Rico, and it trembled again. For our friends in the Pacific that do not know, the south of Puerto Rico has been having earthquakes since 2019, which has also been an issue in terms of recovery from the earthquakes. We still are having problems with that. For example, schools have not been rebuilt still, so the kids in the south of Puerto Rico still don't, they still are going to modules to go to school. That's just one example, and the earth is still trembling. I don't know if the people from Guam want to answer the question about the FEMA response. How do they assess the FEMA response? Or should I go through more questions?
I was going to say, Addie, I actually responded to one of the questions about the FEMA response. It appears, okay. I said, I'm being very optimistic. And I said, it appears that FEMA has learned a lot from its experience in Puerto Rico. Because now I got numbers just the other day, and I was told that of the 27,000 applications, 95% of those applications have already undergone inspection. So 6 weeks out, and we have 95%. I think that's an extremely good rate. I've also been told that about 18% of the applications have been denied. So 18% of that is about 4,000 applications, right? So I'm thinking that FEMA's response has been positive here. They've opened up centers. They found interpreters. So things I think have been moving along quite well. I think the only big issue is that they keep stealing all my hotel rooms. So we've got this huge FEMA presence here. So I can't get a hotel room to save my life under $400 a night. So it's kind of insane, right? Especially when we're trying to rebuild and recover from this entire mess and try to move forward with all of the different things that we normally do, like our continuing legal education, right? We want to make sure that our attorneys are continually being educated about the things that they need to do. So I've got to look more so at the online aspect and doing Zoom things where the attorneys, I think, are so exhausted with Zoom that they want now to do in-person events. So there are many challenges, right, with FEMA's response, but I think so far it's looking good. And as I said to the person who asked the question, I want to be positive and optimistic and say, unfortunately, that's the result of what Puerto Rico experienced, that perhaps that they have learned from that experience and their response there.
Thank you, Jackie. Somebody from CNMI and or from Virgin Islands want to react about how it's been?
Thank you, Adi. It's I from Rhoda. Just wanted to comment and say that, coming from not the recent one that just passed by Mawar, but Super Typhoon Mankut that hit Rhoda back at 2018. I did remember working with FEMA people on the ground with FEMA people on the ground on Rhoda, and they did tell me some stuff. They did say most of their papers recently went to revamp, and they used Puerto Rico as their point of explanation. Like, for sure, in the territories we have different amenities at our homes. For us in the CNMI, they do count the pala pala, that it's another extension of the house where people go out and cook. Same thing. I think what is unique here is that it takes the bigger territories to go through it for us, the smaller territories, to actually get a final draft paper from FEMA. And I think what we could do here is share on the table, but also take back with us to I'll take back to the mayor and let her know that, we need to sit down with FEMA and start underlining and start identifying what is different from stateside, territories, and the islands. Because to be honest with you, I've seen that when FEMA people come to Rhoda, they will be shocked to see some arrangements of our buildings, because they'll be wondering, why would you have a kitchen indoor, but yet you have another kitchen outdoor? And like my Samoan brothers will say, it's hard to cook palusami indoors. It has to be outdoors.
I'm going over there soon, so I want to taste it. I really want to taste everything. Thank you so much. Also, I think we can close with this question. We have, just like 10 minutes to get to the hour of closing. So there is these two questions. How can we use recent federal priorities regarding environmental justice to leverage the Jones Act? And related to that, I wonder if there are opportunities for the territories in the Inflation Reduction Act and the infrastructure law. People know they want to kind of know how these federal attempts to attend to climate and resiliency can be an opportunity. Who will? Okay, Greg.
Yeah, real quick, I'm sure my colleagues want to say something. I would say that those federal opportunities are great. I think, though, that they're still based on the same way of thinking. And I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying that they still don't address some of the fundamentals. They don't address some of the main issues, and they also don't. There's an opportunity, I think, that is missed sometimes to learn beyond from what Washington and the feds are sort of thinking. What I'm saying is that I showed you a little bit of slide of some of the work that I'm trying to do here, and what really sort of gets to me again and again and again is how much work has to be done here in a territory to sort of change the way that we think about our infrastructure systems, change the way that we think about service delivery, and change the way that those systems are being governed. And going back to Cecile, a point about the need for really thinking about governance methodologies and approach to ensure that communities have what they need when they need it. And I don't think that any of those federal program think about that, but I think that for me, it's one of the biggest issues that I see that ultimately continues to create and from my perception, almost reinforce the winners and losers. And until it's almost like we need to take a pause from the federal government. And I really applaud, and I'm really glad that FEMA is providing the help to those who need it right now. But I feel sometimes that we just need to take a pause from our relationship with the federal government and sort of take the time to re-examine sort of like, how do we function? Where do we want to go? And then what does that mean for our relationship with the Fed and the money from the Feds? But I don't think that it's going to happen anytime soon, because that's not how the system is built. And when somebody was asking about changing relationship with hierarchical, I have good relationship with the federal government employees. A lot of them understand the limitation, but also the flaws in the approach. But it is a hierarchical relationship, and what I would like to see is more ways to question and have a dialogue about that hierarchical relationship, because I don't think it's working.
Thank you, Greg. You know, I'm going to take advantage of this point, because when I worked with disaster recovery after Hurricane Maria, one of the big issues was that, and I see it happening everywhere, like there are very local particularities in each of the territories that are not attended by federal programs. And the question seems to be, how can we insert more efficiently solutions that actually attend local particularities? And it seems to be like a common thread in the presentations we have heard today. When I was working at disaster recovery, one of our efforts was to pass a community-driven Recovery for Puerto Rico Act to create a task force from civil society in Puerto Rico to actually inform recovery as part of a solution. So I wanted to kind of like put it out there as an idea that you guys might consider, or have you considered how to insert those local voices more strongly so that programs can respond. And Greg just gave a step before. Greg said we should step back and look within to see what we can do, right, to define where we want to go. So just wanted to have more reactions about that from you, and then we close the discussion.
Ali, and all the panelists, I think these discussions are currently going on in Puerto Rico, not necessarily making a pause, right? Everything is at the same time because the relationship with the federal government exists, and you know we have to deal with that, and at the same time we are at the communities providing service and also in meetings and analyzing and certain issues and promoting civic participation and promoting community insertion in public issues, in promoting participation of communities in committees in government, in the Department of Housing in Puerto Rico, for example, which are the most this is the agency that has the most federal dollars coming in. But there is a truth. And I actually had a meeting with some FEMA officials yesterday, coming from headquarters, and I said these exact words. I said, if Puerto Rico is going to be a territory, while it is a territory, the United States has a responsibility. It's about human dignity, and it's about guaranteeing our rights. It's about human dignity as well. So, it's unfair that when we had Hurricane Fiona, FEMA came, closed in 2 months, closed all their centers, and did not give enough Spanish-speaking officials here, because another storm, another hurricane called Ian, was going to Florida, and everyone was moved to Florida. All the FEMA Spanish-speaking officials from FEMA were deployed to Florida, and they benefited from those Spanish speakers, and they benefited from extensions, and they benefited from having centers open and accessible more than we did here. So there's obviously discrimination. And that was my point. My point was, you have a responsibility with Puerto Rico. You know, you have a responsibility with all the territories. And that's something that, while you have that relationship, we have dignity, and you have to guarantee our rights. You know, it's not fair that in the mainland, as people call it, you know, people receive more money from FEMA, and people in Puerto Rico don't after a disaster, having worse conditions in their homes. You know, it's not also fair that in some of the territories, there are no street numbers. You know, it doesn't matter. People deserve to receive FEMA money to repair their homes. I remember a FEMA official saying, we have experience from the Native American reserve and from tribal lands. They don't have street numbers. The houses don't have numbers either, but they have the right to receive FEMA money. You know, so, you know, that's basically what I want, you know, what I want to say closing with this, that, you know, they have a responsibility, right? So, you know, it's about civil rights, it's about human dignity, and we're going to keep fighting. And at the same time, we're going to keep promoting community participation here in Puerto Rico, and we're going to be very critical of everything as well. Right? So it's not like it's a stamp on everything, you know, coming from the federal government. We're very critical of everything, but at the same time recognizing that people deserve better.
Thank you, Amaris. Any other reaction? And before closing statements, any?
Yeah, I was going to just add to that, and that's a really good point. I was going to add, I think it was to Greg, saying that, or actually one of the other panelists. Yeah, I would agree. I think they learned a lot from Puerto Rico. We're luckier, I think, in some cases as territories, because they've learned from Puerto Rico's situations that they've been able to apply that to us recently as well. But I think we're also lucky in the fact that when we have a disaster like cyclones, you know, we're opposite of the states, right? So when there's cyclones or typhoons in our area, there's not going to be any in in Florida. So we're not competing with Florida or any other states, and Puerto Rico is. And so I just hearing that as well too. I mean, I can see how difficult that is. I mean, that they would pull, you know, the Spanish speakers, you know, the translators to Florida, and they're basically shortchanging Puerto Rico. So we're lucky. Not only that, because we're also, with the smaller population in American Samoa, for example, we've got, you know, less than 15,000 homes. So we're talking about a smaller footprint compared to Puerto Rico. And I think it's unfortunate that Puerto Rico has had so many challenges, and they're right to bring these issues up with the federal government. And we're a little bit luckier just being smaller, but it's thanks to Puerto Rico, I think, on some of the challenges that they've had, that we've been able to benefit a little bit more in our region. But there's still a lot of challenges that we all face. And I think it's good. I really like this panel. I really like, and I apologize for not being there the whole time. My issue, and you know, you mentioned the Jones Act. For me, I think for our territories, it's the cabotage, which is another issue. So there's a lot to discuss. I think we could have these panels every week and have so many things to discuss. But to hearing what's coming from other territories, I think what you've done with this is a great start, so that we can communicate and all have sort of a central line, that a commonality that we can discuss, and seeing how we can help each other. So I want to thank you for that.
Those are actually very good words to kind of like close the discussion. Definitely, we see common threads, even with the differences that we have in terms of FEMA response, in terms of size. One of the things that I think is common is that there are local needs that are very particular to each territory. So there has to be more mechanisms in which territories could participate or affect directly the policies that affect those local needs. Definitely there is that commonality, from the way that people do their food in CNMI to the way that you know, Jackie, we need to build in cement in Guam, and why do we have to prohibit building in coastal lines, but not that? From Greg, and I think Greg kind of like makes us look at it in a bigger way. We're facing climate change. We have to think about the resilience of our communities and how in each particular context, that resiliency means different solutions, right? So how can we keep these conversations going? Definitely in Right to Democracy, we want to serve as conveners for these type of conversations, but also we convene you, or lo exhortamos, oh my God, you say that in English. We tell you to please get in contact with each other. You all have your emails, and if there are other ways, additional ideas of what we can do to help you convene, please let us know. Also, we're going to keep doing these type of conversations. We will do one eventually on climate change. It's just that we thought it was more urgent to do one on Hurricane Mawar because it passed so recently. And we're gonna do one on climate change, probably going to do one about veterans, about elders. So there's so much to talk about between the territories. Please keep in the lookout for our activities. And this is our first one. I apologize for any technical difficulties that we face. We're gonna do better next time. So thank you so much, everybody, for connecting. Good day to our people in the Pacific who are just starting their day right now. And good night to our friends from Virgin Islands. We really appreciate you. And hopefully I will see you soon. Thank you so much.
Buenas noches.
Thank you. Thank you. This is Masi.
Masi,
Saludos,
thank
Masi.